"I do," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of joy and trepidation. The words echoed through the small chapel, sealing my fate in ways I couldn't have imagined. Joe beamed at me, his dark eyes twinkling with love and promise. As we turned to face our small gathering of family and friends, I caught sight of my new mother-in-law, Brenda. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Hartley," the officiant announced. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. My mind was racing, replaying the whirlwind romance that had led to this moment. Just 6 months ago, I was drowning in grief after losing my mother. Now, here I was, starting a new chapter of my life. As we made our way down the aisle, Joe squeezed my hand. "You okay, Lily?" he whispered. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just overwhelmed," I replied. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts. I found myself constantly searching the crowd for Brenda, feeling an inexplicable need to keep her in my sights. "Lily, darling." Brenda's saccharine voice cut through the chatter. She glided towards us, arms outstretched. "Welcome to the family, dear." Her embrace was stiff, her perfume cloying. As she pulled away, she gripped my shoulders, her manicured nails digging in slightly. "We're going to be so close, you and I, like mother and daughter." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Joe, oblivious to the tension, wrapped an arm around his mother. "Isn't this great, Mom? I couldn't be happier." Brenda's eyes never left mine. "Oh yes, it's just wonderful." The rest of the evening passed in a haze. As we prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Brenda cornered me near the coat check. "Lily, dear," she began, her voice low, "I hate to bring this up on your special day, but I've been so worried lately." I frowned, concern creeping in. "What's wrong, Brenda?" She sighed dramatically. "It's just, the house feels so empty since Joe moved out. I'm not as young as I used to be, you know." The thought of living alone? My heart sank as I realized where this was going. Before I could respond, Joe appeared at my side. "Ready to go, Mrs. Hartley?" he asked, grinning. I nodded, grateful for the interruption. As we walked away, I glanced back to see Brenda watching us, a calculating look in her eyes. 2 weeks later, we returned from our honeymoon to find Brenda waiting on our doorstep, suitcases in tow. "Surprise!" she exclaimed, rushing to embrace Joe. "I've decided to take you up on your offer to stay for a while." Joe looked bewildered. "Offer? Mom, what are you talking about?" Brenda's lower lip trembled. "Oh, Joey, don't you remember? We discussed it at the wedding. You said I should come stay with you and Lily if I was feeling lonely." I watched in horror as Joe's face softened. "Of course. Mom, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten. Right, Lily? We did discuss this, didn't we?" Trapped, I nodded weakly. "Yes, of course. Welcome, Brenda." As we helped her move her belongings inside, I caught Brenda smirking at me when Joe wasn't looking. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the battle I was about to face. That night, as Joe slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had my fresh start turned into this? I was a doctor, for heaven's sake. I saved lives every day. Surely, I could handle one meddling mother-in-law. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would test every ounce of my strength and patience. The shrill beeping of my alarm jolted me awake. I groaned, reaching for my phone to silence it. 4:30 a.m. Another early shift at the ER. As I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Joe, I caught a whiff of something burning. Panic surged through me as I rushed downstairs, only to find Brenda in the kitchen, surrounded by smoke. "Oh, good morning, dear," she chirped, waving a dishcloth at the smoking toaster. "I thought I'd make you breakfast before your shift." I forced a smile, my heart still racing. "That's thoughtful, Brenda, but I really need to get ready." Her face fell. "But I went to all this trouble. The least you could do is sit down and eat." Guilt gnawed at me as I glanced at the clock. "I'm sorry, I just don't have time." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I see. Well, don't let me keep you from your important work." The drive to the hospital was tense, my mind replaying Brenda's words. By the time I arrived, I was already exhausted. "Rough night, Dr. Hartley?" my colleague Sarah asked as I entered the ER. I sighed. "You have no idea." The shift was brutal. A multi-car pileup had us working nonstop for hours. As I was finishing up with a patient, my phone buzzed. A text from Joe. "Mom says you left without eating. Everything okay?" I bit back a groan. Before I could respond, Sarah called out, "Lily, we need you. Cardiac arrest coming in." By the time I got home, I was dead on my feet. The house was spotless, and the aroma of a home-cooked meal filled the air. "Welcome home, honey," Joe greeted me with a kiss. "Mom made dinner. Isn't she amazing?" Brenda appeared, all smiles. "I hope you're hungry, Lily. I've been cooking all day." I plastered on a smile. "It smells wonderful. Thank you, Brenda." As we sat down to eat, Brenda dominated the conversation, regaling Joe with tales of her day. I pushed my food around, too tired to eat. "Lily, dear," Brenda's voice cut through my haze. "Don't you like the food? I made it especially for you." "It's delicious," I lied. "I'm just tired." Joe frowned. "Maybe you're working too hard, honey. Mom was saying earlier that she's worried about you." I looked up, startled. "She was?" Brenda nodded, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "Of course, dear. I told Joey how you rushed out this morning without eating. It's not healthy." "I had an early shift," I started to explain, but Brenda cut me off. "And you're always so tired when you get home. It's not fair to Joey, is it? He needs a wife, not a zombie." Joe shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I'm sure Lily's doing her best." "Of course she is." Brenda patted his hand. I just worry, that's all. Maybe if she cut back her hours." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to bed. Good night." As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard Joe and Brenda's muffled voices downstairs. My stomach churned with anxiety. How had I become the bad guy in my own home? The next morning, I woke to find a note from Joe. "Had to leave early for a meeting. Mom's making breakfast. Love you." I steeled myself before heading downstairs. Brenda was at the stove, humming cheerfully. "Good morning, Lily," she said without turning around. "I hope you slept well. I was just telling Joey how worried I am about you." I gritted my teeth. "Brenda, we need to talk." She turned, her face a mask of innocence. "Of course, dear. What about?" As I opened my mouth to speak, my phone rang. The hospital. Another emergency. Brenda's lips curved into a smirk. "Duty calls, I suppose. We'll talk later, dear. Have a good day at work." As I rushed out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of my life, one day at a time. The ER doors burst open as paramedics rushed in with a critical patient. "Female, mid-60s, possible heart attack," one shouted. My heart nearly stopped. The woman on the gurney was Brenda. "Lily," she gasped, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry." I pushed my emotions aside and snapped into doctor mode. "Get her to Bay 3, stat!" Hours later, I slumped against the wall outside Brenda's room, exhausted. We'd stabilized her, but it had been touch and go. Joe appeared, his face pale with worry. "How is she?" "She's stable," I assured him, "but she'll need to stay for observation." He hugged me tightly. "Thank God you were here. I don't know what I'd do without either of you." Guilt gnawed at me. Despite everything, I'd saved Brenda's life. But as I watched Joe fuss over his mother, I couldn't help but wonder, would she see this as a peace offering or another reason to resent me? The next few days were a whirlwind. I juggled my shifts with visiting Brenda, all while trying to keep our home running smoothly. Joe was a constant presence at his mother's bedside, leaving me to handle everything else. On the day of Brenda's discharge, I arrived at the hospital to find her holding court with a group of nurses. "Oh, Lily dear," she cooed as I entered. "I was just telling these lovely ladies how fortunate I am to have such a dedicated daughter-in-law. She's been working herself to the bone, hasn't she?" The nurses nodded sympathetically, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this experience had changed things between us. That hope was short-lived. As soon as we got home, Brenda's sweet facade crumbled. "Well, I suppose I should be grateful you didn't let me die," she sniffed. "Though it would have been nice if you'd visited more. Poor Joey was so worried." I bit my tongue, reminding myself she was still recovering. "I'm sorry, Brenda. I was trying to keep things running smoothly here." She waved dismissively. Yes, always so busy with your important job. Speaking of which, don't you think it's time you took a break? After all, I'll need someone to look after me while I recover." My jaw dropped. "Brenda, I can't just quit my job." "Why not?" she challenged. "Joey makes enough to support us all. And really, Lily, what kind of wife puts her career before her family?" Before I could respond, Joe walked in. "Everything okay in here?" Brenda's eyes instantly filled with tears. "Oh, Joey, I was just telling Lily how overwhelmed I feel. The doctor said I need constant care, and with Lily working such long hours." Joe frowned, turning to me. "Honey, maybe you should take some time off, just until Mom's back on her feet." I stared at him, disbelieving. "Joe, I can't just—" "Please, Lily," he pleaded. For me, for us. I felt the walls closing in. My career, my independence, everything I'd worked for was slipping away. That night, I tossed and turned, Joe's words echoing in my head. By morning, I'd made my decision. With shaking hands, I dialed the hospital. Dr. Reeves? It's Lily Hartley. I need to take a leave of absence. As I hung up, I caught sight of Brenda in the doorway, a triumphant smile on her face. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so glad you're finally putting family first. Now be a dear and fetch my breakfast, won't you? I'm feeling a bit weak this morning." As I trudged downstairs, the reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd saved Brenda's life, only to become a prisoner in my own home. How had it come to this? And more importantly, how was I going to survive it? The days blurred together in a haze of endless chores and Brenda's constant demands. I'd gone from saving lives to folding laundry and preparing meals that were never quite good enough for my mother-in-law's discerning palate. "Lily, dear," Brenda's shrill voice pierced through my thoughts. "Be a lamb and fetch my reading glasses. I seem to have misplaced them again." I bit back a sigh, forcing a smile. "Of course, Brenda. I'll look for them right away." As I searched the house, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, pale, tired, with dark circles under her eyes. What had happened to the confident doctor I used to be? "Lily," Brenda called again, impatience lacing her tone. "What's taking so long?" I found the glasses perched on top of her head and wordlessly handed them to her. She sniffed. "Really, Lily? You'd think a doctor would be more observant. Oh, wait. You're not a doctor anymore, are you?" The word stung, but I swallowed my retort. Joe would be home soon, and I couldn't bear another argument. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, Brenda launched into her usual critique of my cooking. "The chicken's a bit dry, don't you think, Joey? And these vegetables are terribly overcooked." Joe, engrossed in his phone, merely grunted in response. "You know," Brenda continued, "I was thinking, now that Lily's not working, perhaps we should consider redecorating. This house could use a woman's touch." I nearly choked on my water. "Excuse me?" Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry, dear. I'll handle everything. After all, I have much more experience in these matters." "This is our home, Brenda," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Joe and I like it the way it is." She turned to Joe, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Joey, don't you think the house could use some sprucing up? Your father and I always kept our home so lovely." Joe finally looked up from his phone. Yeah, sure, whatever you think, Mom." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. Outside, I gulped in the cool night air, trying to calm my racing heart. How had I let things get this far? I was a prisoner in my own home, my identity slowly being erased by Brenda's constant manipulations. As I paced the backyard, a memory surfaced. My mother's voice, strong and clear. "Never let anyone dim your light, Lily. You're meant to shine." Tears pricked my eyes. What would my mom think if she could see me now? The back door creaked open, and Joe stepped out. "Lily? You okay?" I turned to face him, suddenly angry. "No, Joe. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time." He frowned. "What are you talking about? Your mother, Joe. The way she treats me, the way she's taken over our lives. I can't do this anymore." Joe's face hardened. "Come on, Lily. Mom's just trying to help. You're being oversensitive." "Oversensitive?" I laughed bitterly. "I gave up my career, my independence, everything for you and your mother. And you can't even see what's happening." "What's happening is that you're acting ungrateful," Joe snapped. "Mom's done nothing but try to make our lives easier?" I stared at him, realizing with a sinking heart that I was truly alone in this battle. "You're right, Joe. I am ungrateful. Ungrateful that I married a man who can't see his wife drowning right in front of him." With that, I stormed past him into the house, ignoring Brenda's inquiring looks. In our bedroom, I pulled out a suitcase and began throwing clothes into it. As I zipped it shut, I caught sight of my medical ID badge lying forgotten on the dresser. I picked it up, running my thumb over my name and title. Dr. Lily Hartley, Emergency Medicine. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't change Brenda, and I couldn't make Joe see the truth. But I could change myself. It was time to reclaim my life, whatever the cost. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity, my hands raw from scrubbing and chopping. Brenda's voice rang out from the living room where she sat directing operations like a general. Lily, dear, don't forget the petit fours need to be arranged just so, and make sure the champagne is properly chilled. I gritted my teeth, fighting back the urge to scream. Brenda's grand party had consumed our lives for weeks. My suitcase, packed in a moment of desperation, still sat hidden in our closet. I hadn't been able to bring myself to leave, not yet. Joe breezed into the kitchen, adjusting his tie. Wow, honey, everything looks great. Mom's really outdone herself this time, hasn't she? I froze, the knife in my hand trembling slightly. Joe, I've been cooking and cleaning for days. Your mother hasn't lifted a finger. He frowned, confusion clouding his features. But Mom said she's been working tirelessly on this party. She even mentioned how you've been struggling to keep up. Before I could respond, Brenda swept into the room, resplendent in a glittering gown. Joey, darling, don't you look handsome? Lily, why aren't you dressed yet? The guests will be arriving any minute. I looked down at my flour-stained apron and disheveled appearance. I've been busy preparing everything, Brenda. I haven't had time to... Tsk, tsk, Brenda interrupted, shaking her head. Really, Lily, I expected better from you. This party is so important to me. Couldn't you have made more of an effort? Joe shifted uncomfortably. Mom, maybe you're being a little harsh. Lily's been working hard. Brenda's eyes welled with tears. Oh, Joey, I'm just so disappointed. I wanted everything to be perfect. After all I've been through, is that too much to ask? As Joe moved to comfort his mother, the doorbell rang. Guests had begun to arrive. Lily, go make yourself presentable, Brenda ordered, her tone brooking no argument. And do hurry. The next few hours were a blur of forced smiles and polite small talk. I circulated the room, refilling glasses and passing hors d'oeuvres, all while Brenda held court, regaling her friends with tales of her recovery and how she'd single-handedly planned this magnificent soiree. And of course, I couldn't have done it without my dear daughter-in-law, Brenda announced, beckoning me over. Lily, darling, come here and tell everyone how much you've enjoyed helping me. All eyes turned to me, expectant. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back as I struggled to find words. I'm always happy to help family, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Brenda's smile tightened. Oh, come now, Lily. Don't be modest. Tell them about all the wonderful ideas you contributed. Oh, wait, she paused, her eyes glittering maliciously. I forgot. You didn't contribute any ideas, did you? You were too busy moping about your lost career to be of any real help. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Joe, standing nearby, looked stricken. Mom, what are you saying? Brenda turned to him, her face a mask of innocence. Oh, Joey, I'm just trying to help Lily come out of her shell. She's been so withdrawn lately. I worry about her, you know. I stood there, humiliation burning through me, as Brenda continued to twist the knife. The room began to spin, voices blurring into a cacophony of whispers and judgmental stares. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wouldn't take this anymore. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring the startled exclamations behind me. I climbed the stairs, my legs shaking, and entered our bedroom. The suitcase was still there, waiting. As I reached for it, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, beaten down, hollow-eyed, a shadow of her former self. But in her eyes, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in months. Determination. I grabbed the suitcase and my car keys. It was time to reclaim my life, my identity. As I descended the stairs, I could hear Brenda's voice, still holding court in the living room. Joe appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. Lily, what are you doing? I met his gaze steadily. I'm leaving, Joe. I can't do this anymore. As I walked past him towards the door, I realized that this wasn't just about escaping Brenda's tyranny. It was about finding myself again, the strong, capable woman I used to be. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I stood at the front door, my hand on the knob, ready to walk out on everything I'd known for the past year. Joe's voice, tinged with panic, cut through my resolve. Lily, please, don't do this. We can talk about it. I turned to face him, my voice steady. There's nothing left to say, Joe. I can't live like this anymore. Just as I opened the door, a commotion from the living room caught our attention. A woman's voice, filled with excitement, rose above the murmur of the party. It's her! It's really her! Curiosity overrode my desire to flee. I followed Joe back to the party, where we found a silver-haired woman pointing at me, her eyes wide with recognition. "You're Dr. Hartley, aren't you? The one who saved my life at Rosie's Cafe last year." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. I recognized the woman now. Abigail Thompson, the patient I'd resuscitated during my lunch break months ago. Yes, that's me," I stammered, caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events. Abigail rushed forward, grasping my hands. "I've been trying to find you for months to thank you properly. You disappeared from the hospital before I could." Brenda, looking flustered, tried to interject. "Now, Abigail, dear, this is hardly the time." But Abigail was unstoppable. She turned to the crowd, her voice ringing with emotion. "This woman is a hero. She performed CPR on me when I had a heart attack, kept me alive until the ambulance arrived. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for her quick thinking and skill." The room erupted in applause and exclamations of admiration. I stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in attention. Joe looked at me with a mixture of pride and confusion. Abigail continued, "But wait, I don't understand. Brenda told us you were just a housewife. Why aren't you practicing medicine anymore?" The room fell silent once again. I could feel Brenda's glare burning into me, daring me to speak the truth. In that moment, something inside me broke free. The months of suppressed anger, frustration, and pain came pouring out. "I gave up my career because of Brenda," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "She manipulated her way into our home, made me feel worthless, and slowly stripped away everything that made me who I am." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Joe's face paled as he looked between me and his mother. Brenda, her face contorted with rage, stepped forward. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of my friends." Abigail, sensing the tension, placed a protective hand on my arm. "Brenda, what's going on here? What have you done to this poor girl?" As Brenda sputtered and tried to defend herself, more guests began to speak up. They shared stories of how Brenda had spoken ill of me behind my back, painting me as lazy and incompetent. Joe, looking shell-shocked, finally found his voice. "Mom, is this true? Have you been lying to us all this time?" Brenda's facade crumbled. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally and finding none. In a last-ditch effort, she turned to me, her voice dripping with venom. "You ungrateful little witch. I welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay me? By turning everyone against me?" The room collectively recoiled at her outburst. Joe stepped between us, his face a mask of disbelief and disappointment. "That's enough, Mom. I think you should leave." As Brenda was escorted out, her protests fading into the night, I stood there, trembling. The truth was finally out, but at what cost? Abigail squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You're not alone, Dr. Hartley. We're all here for you." I looked around the room, seeing sympathy and support in the faces of Brenda's former friends. Joe approached me, his eyes filled with remorse. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Can we talk? Please." As the party disintegrated around us, I faced the biggest decision of my life. Could I forgive Joe for his blindness? Could we rebuild what Brenda had so systematically destroyed? Or was it too late to salvage the pieces of my shattered life? The aftermath of Brenda's party left our house in eerie silence. Joe and I sat at opposite ends of the couch, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy between us. Abigail had insisted on staying, her presence a comforting buffer. "I think," Abigail began softly, "that we need to get the whole story out in the open. Joe, Lily's been through hell, and you need to hear it all." Joe nodded, his face ashen. "Please, Lily, I need to understand." Taking a deep breath, I started from the beginning. The words poured out of me like a flood. Brenda's manipulation, the constant criticism, the isolation. With each revelation, Joe's face crumpled further, disbelief giving way to horror. "I had no idea," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Before I could answer, the front door burst open. Cliff, Joe's father, stormed in, his face thunderous. "What in God's name is going on here?" he demanded. "Brenda called me in hysterics, saying you've turned the whole town against her." Abigail stood, her small frame radiating strength. "Cliff, sit down. There's a lot you need to hear." For the next hour, Abigail and I laid out the entire sordid tale. Cliff's anger slowly morphed into shock, then shame. "I knew Brenda could be difficult," he mumbled, "but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Just as we finished, the door opened again. Brenda swept in, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "Well, I hope you're all happy," she spat. "My reputation is in tatters, thanks to you ungrateful." "That's enough, Brenda," Cliff cut her off, his voice steely. "I've heard everything. How could you do this to our family? To Lily?" Brenda's face contorted with rage. "How could I? How could she? She stole my son, turned him against me. I was just trying to protect our family." "By destroying mine," I shot back, years of pent-up anger finally breaking free. "You made my life a living hell, Brenda. You took everything from me, my career, my confidence, nearly my marriage." Joe stood, placing himself between Brenda and me. "Mom, I think you should leave. Now." Brenda's eyes widened in disbelief. "Joey, you can't mean that, after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done?" Joe's voice rose. "You've lied, manipulated, and abused the woman I love. Get out of our house, now." For a moment, Brenda looked like she might argue further. Then, with a final venomous glare at me, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Cliff cleared his throat, looking years older than he had an hour ago. "Lily, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do." I held up a hand, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you, Cliff, but right now, I think I need some time." As Cliff and Abigail prepared to leave, Joe turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Lily, please, can we talk?" I looked at him, this man I'd loved enough to sacrifice everything for. Could I forgive him for being so blind? Could we rebuild what Brenda had so systematically destroyed? "I don't know, Joe," I said honestly. "I need time to think, to figure out who I am without Brenda's shadow looming over me." Joe nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. But please, don't give up on us. I love you, Lily. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As I watched him walk away, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The truth was finally out, Brenda's reign of terror over. But the cost had been high. Could I reclaim the pieces of my shattered life? And more importantly, did I want to? I turned to Abigail, who had become an unexpected ally in this storm. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You heal, Dr. Hartley, and then you decide what kind of life you want to build from the ashes of the old one." As I stood there on the precipice of an uncertain future, I realized that for the first time in months I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. 6 months after Brenda's dramatic exit from our lives, I stood outside the hospital, my heart racing. Today marked my return to the ER, a day I'd both longed for and feared. "You've got this, Dr. Hartley," Abigail's voice came from beside me. Our unexpected friendship had become my anchor during the tumultuous months of healing and self-discovery. I took a deep breath and stepped through the doors, the familiar antiseptic smell washing over me. As I made my way to the locker room, I caught sight of my reflection. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who'd left this hospital over a year ago. Stronger, wiser, with a glint of hard-won confidence in her eyes. My first shift was a whirlwind of activity. As I treated patients, my hands moving with practiced skill, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This was where I belonged. During a rare quiet moment, I stepped out for some air. To my surprise, Joe was waiting by the entrance, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. "I wanted to be here for your first day back," he said, his voice tinged with hope and uncertainty. Over the past months, we'd been slowly rebuilding our relationship, attending couples therapy, and having long, honest conversations. It hadn't been easy, but we were both committed to making it work. "Thank you," I said, accepting the flowers. "It means a lot that you're here." Just then my pager went off. "I have to go," I said apologetically. Joe nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Go save lives, Dr. Hartley. I'll be here when you're done." As I rushed back inside, I felt a surge of gratitude for how far we'd come. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of emergencies and quick decisions. As I was preparing to leave, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. My blood ran cold as I recognized the voice. Brenda. She was being wheeled in on a gurney, clearly in distress. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. In that instant, I had a choice to make. I could walk away, let someone else handle her case. After all she'd put me through, no one would blame me. But as I looked at her, vulnerable and afraid, I remembered why I became a doctor in the first place. To help people, regardless of who they were or what they'd done. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. "I'll take this one," I said to the surprised nurse. As I began examining Brenda, her eyes widened with recognition and, was that shame? "Lily," she whispered, "I don't deserve your help." I met her gaze steadily. "You're my patient, Brenda. That's all that matters right now." Over the next few hours, I worked tirelessly to stabilize Brenda's condition. It turned out to be a severe panic attack, brought on by the stress of her isolation and the weight of her actions. As she recovered, Brenda looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Lily, for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I regret what I did to you." I nodded, feeling a weight I didn't know I was carrying lift from my shoulders. "Thank you for saying that, Brenda. It means a lot." As I left her room, I found Joe waiting outside. He pulled me into a tight embrace. "I saw what you did in there," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're incredible, Lily. I'm so proud of you." In that moment, surrounded by the bustle of the hospital, held in the arms of the man I loved, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here, back to myself, stronger and more resilient than ever. As we walked out of the hospital hand in hand, I realized that this wasn't just an ending, but a new beginning. I had reclaimed my career, my self-respect, and my voice, and I vowed never to let anyone silence me again. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. There would be challenges, of course, but I was ready to face them head-on, because now I knew my own strength, and I had a support system that wouldn't let me fall. As the sun set on my first day back, I smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. Dr. Lily Hartley was back, and she was here to stay.
This story is titled, "Sister Held Me Responsible for Her Divorce. My Family Sided with Her, but 3 years later, karma struck." Hey everyone, I just wanted to share something real with you. The channel's been slowing down a bit recently, and honestly, I put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what I do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "Growing up, it was like my sister Hannah could do no wrong. My parents, especially my mom, doted on her endlessly. I was the younger sibling, the afterthought. If Hannah wanted something, she got it, no questions asked. If I wanted something, I was told, you need to earn it. It wasn't always big things either. Small stuff like getting the last slice of pizza or having the TV remote for the night. With her, it was automatic. With me, it was conditional. By the time I was 10, I stopped bothering to ask for much. If I didn't, there was no chance for rejection. Instead, I'd quietly make do with what I had, hoping to avoid conflict. Hannah, she thrived on being the center of attention. She'd boss me around, and when I protested, my parents would tell me to stop being difficult. I can't count the number of times I heard, "Hannah is older. She knows better," even when she clearly didn't. The worst part was that I didn't even hate her for it back then. I wanted to like my sister. I really did. I wanted to believe we were on the same team, but she rarely treated me like we were. If she had the chance to throw me under the bus to keep herself in good standing with our parents, she wouldn't hesitate. That pattern didn't change as we got older. By the time Hannah turned 25, she got engaged to Jacob, a guy I honestly thought was way too good for her. He was the complete opposite of her in every way, grounded, mature, and respectful. I hoped that marriage might help her mature, help her grow out of the self-centered bubble she lived in. Maybe Jacob could be the stability she needed. For a while, it even seemed like that might happen. Hannah looked genuinely happy, and Jacob seemed devoted to her. But old habits die hard, and within a year of their wedding, the cracks started to show. It wasn't like she was hiding her behavior either. On one visit to my parents' house, I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone about how boring Jacob had become. She said he was too serious and didn't know how to have fun anymore. To me, it sounded like he was just trying to be a responsible adult. Still, my parents dismissed any concerns. Whenever Jacob brought up her late nights or her excessive spending, they'd side with her. "She's still young," they'd say. "Jacob needs to stop trying to control her." It was like nothing had changed from when we were kids. Hannah could act however she wanted, and anyone who tried to hold her accountable was the problem. I wasn't close enough to Jacob to talk to him about it, but I started noticing things that made me uneasy. For one, Hannah was glued to her phone in a way that wasn't normal. If it buzzed, she'd snatch it up and immediately walk out of the room. If Jacob asked who it was, she'd brush it off with a vague answer, or tell him not to worry about it. It was like she was daring him to ask more questions, just so she could accuse him of being controlling. The turning point for me came when I saw a message on her phone. I wasn't snooping. She'd left it on the kitchen counter while she grabbed something from the fridge. The screen lit up, and there it was. A message from someone named L about meeting at a hotel. My stomach dropped. I didn't know who L was, but I doubted it was just a friend. The way the message was worded, it wasn't exactly subtle. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, but I knew better. I debated with myself for weeks about what to do. Should I tell Jacob? Should I confront Hannah? Or should I just stay out of it? Wasn't naive. I knew what the fallout would be if I said anything. My parents would immediately side with her, and Hannah would probably find a way to make me the villain. I tried convincing myself that maybe it wasn't my place. Maybe Jacob would figure it out on his own. But deep down, I knew I was just scared. Things escalated a few months later when Hannah introduced us to Noah, a friend from her new job. From the moment I met him, I knew there was more to the story. He was charming, sure, but the way he and Hannah interacted wasn't the way friends behaved. They had inside jokes, whispered conversations, and way too much physical closeness. It wasn't even subtle. Jacob seemed uneasy too, but he didn't say anything. I figured he was trying to trust his wife. Meanwhile, my parents adored Noah. He was polite, well-dressed, and always knew the right thing to say. They didn't notice, or maybe didn't want to notice, how he and Hannah behaved around each other. I told myself that if Jacob wasn't saying anything, I shouldn't either. It wasn't my business. But the guilt of staying quiet started eating at me. The final straw seemed when Hannah invited Noah to a family barbecue. The barbecue was supposed to be a simple family get-together. My parents invited everyone to their backyard for burgers, drinks, and a relaxing evening. I wasn't exactly thrilled to go. I rarely was when family events were involved. But Rachel convinced me. She thought it might help ease the tension I always felt around my parents and Hannah. I agreed, figuring it wouldn't hurt to show up for a few hours and leave early. When we arrived, everything seemed fine at first. Jacob was helping Dad at the grill, and Hannah was mingling with some of the neighbors. Rachel greeted everyone politely, doing her best to fit in despite how little my family had made her feel welcome in the past. She didn't say it outright, but I knew she noticed how different the atmosphere was when it came to Hannah. Everyone gravitated toward my sister, laughing at her jokes and hanging on her every word. It was like she was the sun, and the rest of us were planets in her orbit. Then Noah showed up. I hadn't known he'd be there, and from the look on Jacob's face, neither had he. Noah strolled in like he owned the place, carrying a six-pack and greeting everyone like they were old friends. Hannah's face lit up when she saw him, and she practically ran over to give him a hug. Jacob looked down at the ground, and I felt a pang of secondhand embarrassment for him. It didn't take long for Noah to start stirring the pot. He was one of those people who couldn't resist making everything about himself. Within minutes, he was cracking jokes at everyone's expense, including mine. "Hey, how's the little brother doing? Still tagging along behind Big Sis?" he asked, smirking. I forced a laugh and ignored him, but I could feel Rachel stiffen next to me. The tipping point came when Noah turned his attention to Rachel. He asked her where she was from, what she did for a living, and then, without missing a beat, made a comment about how I'd really lucked out with her. It wasn't a compliment. It was the kind of backhanded remark that made it clear he thought I didn't deserve her. "Man, you must have some serious charm to land someone like her. I mean, she's way out of your league," he said, laughing. Rachel smiled politely and tried to brush it off, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes. I wanted to tell Noah to shut up, but I knew it would only escalate things. So I stayed quiet, hoping he'd get bored and move on. He didn't. As the evening went on, Noah kept finding ways to needle me. He'd make little digs about my job, my car, even my choice of shoes. I could handle it. I was used to people like him. But then he crossed a line. Rachel was standing by the table talking to my mom when Noah accidentally spilled his drink on her. The soda soaked the front of her dress, and she gasped, looking down in shock. "Oh no, looks like someone's ready for a wet t-shirt contest," Noah said, laughing like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Rachel's face turned bright red, and she looked like she was about to cry. That was it for me. I walked over to Noah and told him, loud enough for everyone to hear, to apologize to Rachel. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Relax, man. It was just a joke," he said, shrugging. "Apologize," I repeated, my voice steady but firm. Hannah jumped in before Noah could respond. "Oh, come on. It wasn't that serious. You're being so oversensitive. It's not like he meant to spill it." I turned to her, my anger boiling over. "Are you serious right now? He humiliated Rachel in front of everyone, and you're defending him?" Hannah rolled her eyes. "You're ruining the mood. Can you just let it go for once? It's a party. My parents, predictably, sided with her. He didn't mean any harm, my mom said. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Why don't you just apologize and let's move on? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like I was a kid again, being told to shut up and go along with whatever Hannah wanted. Something inside me snapped. Years of frustration and resentment came pouring out, and I didn't care about the consequences anymore. You want to talk about ruining the mood? I said, looking directly at Hannah. Why don't you tell everyone what's really going on between you and Noah? Or should I do it for you? The backyard went silent. Hannah's face turned pale, and for the first time that night, she didn't have a snarky comeback. I took a deep breath and kept going. You think nobody notices the way you two act around each other? The sneaky looks, the private conversations? Do you think Jacob doesn't see it? Jacob's eyes widened, and he looked at Hannah, who was shaking her head furiously. Don't listen to him, she said, her voice trembling. He's just trying to cause drama. Am I? I shot back. Because I've got texts and pictures that say otherwise. Do you want to see them, or should we let Jacob decide? At that point, Jacob stood up, his face a mix of anger and heartbreak. What texts? He asked, his voice shaking. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I'd saved, the messages from Hannah's phone, and the pictures of her and Noah leaving a hotel together. Jacob stared at them in silence, and then he looked at Hannah. Is this true? He asked. Hannah didn't answer. She just stood there, her face red with anger and embarrassment. You're such a liar. She finally screamed at me. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to ruin my life. My parents rushed to her defense, accusing me of stirring up trouble and being cruel. How could you do this to your sister? My mom asked, glaring at me. You're tearing this family apart. I couldn't believe it. Even with the evidence right in front of them, they still refused to hold Hannah accountable. I looked at Jacob, who was now gathering his things and preparing to leave. I'm sorry, man, I said. I thought you deserved to know. He nodded, his face blank, and walked out without another word. The rest of the barbecue was chaos. Hannah was screaming at me. My parents were yelling, and Noah had disappeared at some point during the argument. Rachel grabbed my hand and whispered, Let's go. As we drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I'd finally stood up for myself, but I knew the fallout was only just beginning. After the barbecue, I knew my relationship with my family would never be the same. I had crossed the line, at least in their eyes, by exposing Hannah for what she'd done. But I didn't feel guilty about it. If anything, I felt like I'd done the right thing, even if nobody but Jacob appreciated it. Still, the days following the barbecue were some of the loneliest and most exhausting of my life. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. Hannah wasted no time spinning the story in her favor. She called our parents the next day, crying about how I'd ruined her marriage and lied about her relationship with Noah. She claimed I'd always been jealous of her success and had finally found a way to sabotage her happiness. I wasn't surprised she'd throw me under the bus. It was textbook Hannah. What did shock me was how quickly my parents sided with her. You need to fix this, my dad said when he called me that afternoon. You've caused enough damage already. Your sister is heartbroken. Heartbroken, I shot back. She's been cheating on Jacob for months, and you're blaming me for exposing her? Are you even listening to yourself? She made a mistake, but it's not your place to air her dirty laundry in front of everyone, he said, his voice sharp. What you did was cruel. Cruel? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She's the one who's been lying, cheating, and making everyone else miserable, but I'm the problem? You're seriously going to keep defending her after everything? You've always been difficult, my mom chimed in when she took the phone. Hannah has always tried her best to keep the family together, but you've never appreciated her. And now you've gone too far. There it was. The same narrative I'd heard my entire life. Hannah was the golden child, the glue holding the family together, while I was the rebellious, ungrateful younger sibling. It didn't matter that I had proof of her infidelity, or that Jacob had left because of her actions. To them, I was the villain for standing up to her. The conversation ended with my dad giving me an ultimatum. Unless you apologize to your sister and admit you were lying, you're not welcome in this house anymore. I hung up without saying another word. Apologize? For what? Telling the truth? There was no way I'd do that. Not after everything that had happened. But hearing those words, being told I wasn't welcome in my own family, still hit me harder than I expected. Rachel was my rock through it all. When I told her what had happened, she hugged me tightly and said, You don't need them. You have me, and we'll figure this out together. Her support meant everything, but the weight of losing my family still hung over me like a dark cloud. I wasn't sure how to process it. A part of me kept hoping they'd come to their senses, But deep down, I knew better. Within days, the fallout spread to the rest of the family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd heard bits and pieces of the story started reaching out, most of them taking Hannah's side. She'd painted me as a bitter troublemaker who had gone out of my way to destroy her marriage for no reason. Some of them didn't even bother asking for my side of the story. They just assumed I was in the wrong. "Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" one of my uncles asked when he called. "What Hannah does in her marriage is none of your business." "You don't get it," I said, frustrated. "She's been lying to everyone, including Jacob. Why is it okay for her to hurt people, but not okay for me to call her out?" "It's not about what's okay," he replied. "It's about family, and what you did was out of line." Family. That word started to feel meaningless to me. How could they talk about loyalty and unity while ignoring the damage Hannah had caused? It was like everyone was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a perfect family that they were willing to throw me under the bus to keep the peace. With nowhere else to turn, I packed up my things and moved out of the state with Rachel. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only way to truly start fresh. Staying close to my family would only mean more drama, more accusations, and more pain. Rachel and I found a small apartment in a city a few hours away, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Those first few months were tough. I had to find a new job and adjust to life without any support system. Rachel was incredible through it all, helping me stay positive and reminding me that we were building something better for ourselves. Still, there were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable. I'd lie awake, replaying conversations with my parents in my head, wondering if there was something I could have said or done differently. But as time went on, I started to heal. I found a decent job at a local company, and Rachel and I grew even closer through the challenges we faced together. We got engaged a year later, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. I had Rachel, a steady income, and a sense of independence I'd never had before. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. As for my family, I didn't hear from them. Not a single call, text, or email. It was like I'd been erased from their lives entirely. I tried not to dwell on it, but there were moments when the silence hurt more than I wanted to admit. I kept telling myself I didn't need them, but part of me still wished they'd reach out, if only to acknowledge the pain they'd caused. 3 years passed, and life continued to move forward. Rachel and I got married in a small ceremony with close friends, and we started saving up for a house. I thought I'd put my family drama behind me for good. Then, one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. I was grabbing lunch at a McDonald's drive-thru when I saw her, Hannah. She was working the window, handing out orders and taking payments. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then our eyes met. Her face turned pale and she quickly looked away, pretending not to recognize me. I was stunned. Hannah, who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, was working at a fast food restaurant in a completely different state. As I drove away with my order, questions raced through my mind. What had happened to her? Why was she here? And where were our parents? I couldn't shake the image of her, looking tired and defeated. Despite everything she'd done, part of me felt a pang of sympathy for her. But another part remembered all the pain she'd caused, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out the answers to my questions, or if I even cared. Update 1 point. I couldn't get the image of Hannah out of my mind. Seeing her behind that drive-through window was surreal. This was the same sister who, for most of my life, had been untouchable. She was the golden child, the one who always landed on her feet no matter how many times she stumbled. Now she looked beaten, tired, human. For a couple of days, I tried to push the encounter out of my head. Rachel noticed I was distracted and asked what was going on. I told her about seeing Hannah and how it had stirred up old feelings I thought I'd buried. Rachel didn't push me, but she reminded me that I wasn't obligated to do anything. "You don't owe her a thing," she said gently. "Not after what she did to you, and to us." She was right, of course. Hannah had caused me so much pain, not to mention how she had humiliated Rachel during that barbecue years ago. But despite everything, a small part of me felt curious. What had happened to her? Why was she working at a McDonald's in another state? And where were my parents in all of this? Curiosity eventually got the better of me. I decided to go back to the McDonald's and try to talk to her during her break. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to accomplish. Closure, maybe? Answers? Just the satisfaction of seeing her squirm? Wasn't sure, but I felt like I needed to do it. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat but defensive. I sat down across from her, keeping my tone calm. "I saw you the other day," I said. "I just wanted to know what happened." She looked away, stabbing at her salad with her fork. "Why do you care?" she muttered. "You've made it pretty clear you're done with me." "I'm curious," I admitted. Last I heard, you were still living at home. Now you're here, working. This. I gestured vaguely at the McDonald's behind us. What happened, Hannah? For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, as if a dam had broken, the words started pouring out. She told me about how, after Jacob left, things spiraled out of control. Our parents, who had always supported her, eventually reached their breaking point. They couldn't keep funding her lifestyle, especially when she refused to take responsibility for anything. According to Hannah, they threw her out after an argument about money. I had nowhere to go, she said, her voice trembling. So I moved in with Noah. He said he had a job lined up here, so we came to this state. But it turned out he was running from debt collectors, and the job never existed. Now I'm stuck here, working this crappy job while he sits at home doing nothing. She paused, wiping at her eyes. I know I've made mistakes, okay? I know I've screwed up, but I'm really struggling right now. I need a little help to get back on my feet. Can you? She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. I stared at her, trying to process everything. Part of me felt sorry for her. She was clearly in a bad place, and for the first time in her life, she didn't have anyone to bail her out. But another part of me remembered all the pain she'd caused, how she'd lied about me, turned my family against me, and left me to pick up the pieces of my own life. I'll think about it, I said finally, standing up. That's all I can promise right now. She nodded, looking both disappointed and relieved. Thanks, she said quietly. I walked away, my mind racing. I wasn't sure what I'd expected from that conversation, but it left me with more questions than answers. The story she told me didn't completely add up. My parents had always been willing to do anything for her. What could have possibly pushed them to throw her out? Something didn't feel right, and I decided I needed to dig deeper before making any decisions. Over the next few days, I reached out to some old family friends and distant relatives to piece together what had happened after I left. The story I uncovered was far worse than I'd imagined. Apparently, after Jacob left, Hannah stayed with my parents, bringing Noah with her. She insisted they were just friends and needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. My parents, still believing her version of events, agreed to let them live there. For a while, things seemed fine, at least on the surface. My parents even helped Hannah find a job and paid for therapy sessions she claimed she needed to process the divorce. Later, I found out she never actually attended those sessions. About 8 months after I left, things took a darker turn. Hannah started pressuring my parents to transfer the house to her name. She claimed it was for security and promised to take care of them in return. My parents, eager to support their golden child, eventually gave in despite some initial reservations. But as soon as the house was in her name, Hannah and Noah sold it without warning. They disappeared with the money, leaving my parents homeless and broke. Hearing this made my stomach turn. My parents, who had defended Hannah their entire lives, who had sacrificed so much for her, were now living in a tiny, run-down apartment, barely scraping by on my dad's pension. They had been betrayed in the worst possible way, and Hannah was the one who had done it. I spent the next couple of days trying to process everything. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger at Hannah for her selfishness, guilt for not being there for my parents, and confusion about what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her again, but another part wondered if it was even worth it. What could I possibly say to someone who had burned every bridge they'd ever had? In the end, I decided I needed to hear it from her. I went back to the McDonald's during her break and laid everything out on the table: the house, the money, our parents' current living situation. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. It was all true. Hannah broke down, alternating between excuses and apologies. She claimed she never meant for things to go that far, that Noah had manipulated her, and that she was now trapped in an abusive relationship with him. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her, but then she shifted gears, accusing me of being selfish for not helping her, now that she was in trouble. "You've always been jealous of me," she said, her voice rising. "You've been waiting for a chance to see me fail, and now you're enjoying it." I stood up, shaking my head. "You don't get it, do you?" I said. "This isn't about jealousy. This is about you finally facing the consequences of your actions." Before I left, I gave her the contact information for local women's shelters and abuse support groups. "If you're serious about leaving Noah, these places can help," I said. "But I can't. Not after everything." Her final words to me were filled with anger and bitterness, but I didn't care. For the first time, I saw Hannah for who she truly was: a selfish, manipulative person who refused to take responsibility for her actions. And I knew then that I couldn't let her drag me back into her chaos. After my confrontation with Hannah at McDonald's, I drove home feeling an odd mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved to have finally gotten the truth out in the open. On the other, it left me feeling drained and angry. How could someone cause so much pain and still twist it around to make herself the victim? I replayed her words in my head, the way she called me selfish, the accusations of jealousy, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It was classic Hannah, refusing to take accountability and lashing out when things didn't go her way. When I got home, Rachel immediately knew something was up. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but she put it down as soon as she saw my face. "How did it go?" she asked. I sat down next to her and let out a deep sigh. "It went about as well as you'd expect," I said. "She admitted to everything, selling the house, leaving our parents homeless, all of it. But of course, she blamed Noah and tried to make herself the victim." Rachel shook her head, her expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. "Did she at least apologize?" "She tried in her own way," I replied. "But then she turned around and accused me of being jealous and selfish for not helping her." Rachel scoffed. "Unbelievable. After everything she's done to you, and to your parents, she still thinks you owe her something?" I nodded. "Exactly. I told her I couldn't help her, but I gave her information for shelters and support groups if she wanted to leave Noah. She didn't take it well." Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "Helping her financially would only enable her behavior. She needs to figure this out on her own." Her words reassured me, but there was still one unresolved issue weighing on my mind. My parents. Now that I knew the truth about what had happened to them, I couldn't ignore it. They were living in a rundown apartment, struggling to make ends meet because of Hannah's betrayal. Part of me felt like I should help them. They were my parents, after all. But another part of me remembered how they had treated me, how they had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. Over the next few days, I wrestled with what to do. Rachel and I talked about it endlessly, and she remained supportive no matter what I decided. "You don't owe them anything," she reminded me. "But if helping them gives you some peace of mind, I'll support you." Finally, after much deliberation, I decided to reach out. I wasn't sure if I wanted to rebuild a relationship with them, but I felt like I at least needed to hear their side of the story. I wrote them a letter explaining that I had learned about their situation and was willing to talk if they were interested. I included my phone number, but didn't give them my address. I wasn't ready for them to show up at my doorstep unannounced. To my surprise, my dad called me just a couple of days after I sent the letter. His voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered, and there was a nervous edge to his tone. "Thank you for reaching out," he said. "We'd like to talk if you're willing." We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our homes. When I saw them for the first time in years, I was shocked by how much they had aged. My mom looked frail and tired, and my dad, who had always carried himself with confidence, now seemed stooped and uncertain. It was a stark reminder of how much time had passed and how much had changed. The conversation started awkwardly. There was so much unspoken hurt and resentment between us that it felt like a wall was separating us. But as we talked, the full story of what had happened after I left began to emerge. They admitted they had been wrong to side with Hannah and apologized for the way they had treated me. My dad explained that deep down, they had known I was telling the truth about her affair, but they couldn't bring themselves to accept it. "We wanted to believe the best in her," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We thought if we just supported her enough, she'd turn things around." My mom, with tears in her eyes, told me how Hannah had manipulated them into signing over the house. "She said it was for our security," she said, her voice trembling. "We believed her, and then she sold it without telling us. By the time we realized what had happened, it was too late. They told me they had tried to press charges, but because they had willingly signed the house over to her, there was little they could do legally. The betrayal had been a harsh wake-up call for them, and they had spent the past few years struggling to rebuild their lives. Hearing their remorse felt bittersweet. On one hand, it was validating to hear them acknowledge the mistakes they had made. On the other, it brought back all the pain of being cast out and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. "I appreciate your apology," I said finally, my voice steady but guarded. "But rebuilding our relationship will take time. I have my own family now with Rachel, and my priority is protecting our peace and happiness." They nodded, seeming to understand. "We're grateful you even gave us the chance to talk," my dad said. "We know we don't deserve it." Before we parted, I gave them my contact information and told them we could stay in touch. In the weeks that followed, we had a few phone calls, brief and sometimes awkward, but a start. I also arranged for some financial assistance to help them move to a better apartment and cover some of their medical expenses. I made it clear that this help came with no strings attached. I wasn't doing it to buy their affection or to erase the past. I was doing it because it felt like the right thing to do. As for Hannah, I haven't heard from her since our last conversation at McDonald's. A part of me hopes she's found the courage to leave Noah and get help, but I'm not optimistic. She's made her choices, and I've made mine.
You should have handed over control when Dad passed. Brielle's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. This is our chance to sell and make a real profit. My heart stuttered as I peered around the corner, spotting my cousin deep in conversation with Ethan, my fiancé of 3 years. They huddled near the bar, oblivious to my eavesdropping presence at our winery's annual harvest party. I'm in, Ethan murmured with a solemn nod. We'll tell Avery after securing the deal. She won't be able to refuse once the money's on the table. Bile rose in my throat as the truth slammed into me. My own family, my supposed loved ones, plotting to steal away my father's life's work, everything I'd sacrificed to preserve. Trembling, I stormed away, desperate for space to process the gut-wrenching betrayal. Tears blurred my vision as I fled through the vineyard's rows, the muffled sounds of celebration fading behind me. How could they? After all the blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into this place, into keeping Dad's dream alive. And Ethan? The man I'd planned to marry, willing to strip me of my legacy for profit. The vines stretched endlessly in every direction, mirroring the tangled maze of shock and rage clawing at my chest. I stumbled forward, uncaring of the twigs snagging my dress or the chill night air whipping across my face. It wasn't until I reached the secluded corner where Dad's favorite rosebush grew that I finally crumpled to the ground in anguished sobs. The petals glistened with dew, oblivious to my shattering world. After several ragged breaths, determination replaced despair. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Not while a single drop of my father's spirit flowed through these vines. If Ethan and Brielle wanted a war for the winery's soul, they'd soon discover I possessed more metal than they could ever fathom. Fueled by righteous fury, I rose and marched with renewed purpose back toward the celebration. Ethan and Brielle would never see the tempest brewing behind my controlled smile as I rejoined the crowd. Let them bask in their misguided confidence. It would make their downfall all the more catastrophic. I was the master of this vineyard, and by night's end, I'd have the perfect scheme to protect Dad's legacy at all costs. In the days following the harvest party, I played the role of the oblivious fiancé to perfection. Ethan remained affectionate, his gentle kisses and soft caresses mere rehearsed performances masking his deceit. "How was your meeting with the marketing team?" he asked over dinner one evening, his hazel eyes betraying not a glimmer of guilt. I forced a smile. "Productive. We've got some exciting new campaigns in the works." Ethan nodded, shoveling a forkful of pasta into his mouth. "That's great, babe. I know how hard you've been working to take the winery to new heights." The blatant hypocrisy nearly made me gag. While he spouted meaningless platitudes, I secretly gathered evidence, piecing together the full extent of his treachery with Brielle. Tapping into the winery's financial records and encrypted communications, I discovered their embezzlement stretched back months, funds they'd been funneling into an offshore account. Printouts detailing dozens of wire transfers lay scattered across my office desk like damning puzzle pieces. My blood boiled as I connected their illicit money trail to meetings with corporate bigwigs, vultures eager to devour my family's legacy. "You lying, grasping snakes," I seethed through gritted teeth. The office door creaked open, and Lucia, my most trusted employee, stepped in with a concerned frown. "Everything okay, Miss Connors?" I waved her inside and gestured to the documents. "See for yourself. My dear fiancé and cousin have been stabbing us in the back for months, setting up a sale to that blood-sucking conglomerate we've been fighting off." Lucia's eyes widened in horror as she scanned the records. "Those maneuvers, how could they?" "Greed and self-preservation," I spat. "Ethan's likely counting on making me the rank-and-file winery bitch once the deal is done." I slammed my fist on the desk, delighting in Lucia's startled flinch. "But they're gravely mistaken if they think I'll roll over without bringing the entire facade crumbling down on their heads." Lucia swallowed hard, her voice wavering. "What are you going to do?" A wicked grin stretched across my face as the seeds of vengeance took root. "I'm going to remind them why you don't dispense with honor among thieves." The next morning, I strode into Marcia Blackwood's prestigious law office, evidence folder in hand. If anyone could help dismantle Ethan and Brielle's underhanded scheme, it was Marcia, a brilliant legal shark with a reputation for devouring corporate sleazeballs. Miss Connors, her assistant, ushered me inside. Miss Blackwood is expecting you. I found the renowned attorney studying a stack of documents behind her imposing mahogany desk. Razor-sharp eyes scrutinized me over the rim of her glasses as I approached. "You certainly have a flair for dramatic entrances," Marcia said dryly. "I hope, for your sake, you've brought me something substantial." Wordlessly, I handed over the folder and waited as she flipped through the incriminating paperwork. Bank statements, encrypted emails, everything I'd compiled on the betrayal. Marcia's practiced mask of stoicism slipped, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. "This is unbelievable. Your own family conspiring against you in broad daylight." I stifled the urge to snap. Try having that realization slap you across the face. Instead, I simply nodded. "Can you help me take them down?" My voice remained steady, devoid of the raging storm churning beneath my composed exterior. "I want to bury Ethan and Brielle under the full weight of legal and public retribution." A predatory glint flickered in Marcia's eyes, the look of a tiger scenting blood on the wind. "Oh, I'll do more than that, Miss Connors. By the time we're through, their reputations and freedom will be torn asunder. They'll be left destitute, forced to slink away from this valley with their tails between their legs." My lips curved into a vindictive smile, already envisioning the devastation I'd rain down upon the traitorous snakes slithering in my midst. Over the ensuing days, Marcia and I constructed an impenetrable counteroffensive, rallying allies in preparation to obliterate Ethan and Brielle's scheme. Anthony, my winery's head vintner, eagerly supplied information to undermine their corporate dealings. Jackson, our top sales rep, helped divert funds and reroute profitable distribution contracts. Kara in marketing launched a campaign showcasing our heritage and community ties, the very soul they aimed to ravage for profit. With each Ailey recruited and assets secured, the day of reckoning crept inexorably closer. Ethan and Brielle carried on clueless, their arrogance blinding them to the crumbling ground beneath their feet. I could hardly wait to cement the trapdoor's collapse and revel in their pathetic, well-deserved downfall. The first strike hit with precise, surgical brutality. This just in. Financial records have surfaced exposing embezzlement and corporate fraud at Connor Family Vineyards, the local news anchor announced in a grave tone. Sources indicate Chief Marketing Officer Ethan Baxter and Deputy Manager Brielle Evans have been funneling company assets into overseas accounts for personal gain. I watched with wicked satisfaction as the damning report flashed on the TV, my finger hovering over the pause button. Frozen on screen, Ethan and Brielle's faces contorted in horror. A perfect captured memory. In the ensuing days, a merciless barrage of legal filings and media leaks descended upon the conspirators. Marcia worked tirelessly, slapping them with criminal charges while ensuring every salacious allegation dominated headlines. Ethan confronted me in a heated parking lot showdown, his usually polished veneer cracked and disheveled. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded through clenched teeth, eyes wild and desperate. "We were going to set you up with a nice payoff, more than enough to retire comfortably." I laughed in his face, loud and mocking. "And let you thieves bleed my father's legacy dry? Spend his life's work on foosball tables and degenerate thrill-seeking?" The venom in my tone seemed to shrink him before my very eyes. "You deluded yourself into thinking I'd just hand over the keys and walk away once the money hit my account, that I'd forsake my responsibilities, my duties as Connor heir." Poking his chest with each enunciated word, I leaned until our faces were mere inches apart. "You miscalculated. Badly." Ethan recoiled, his expression incredulous. "So that's it? You'd rather watch everything burn than compromise?" Meeting his gaze with frigid certainty, I replied, "Some legacies are worth martyring over." With that, I spun on my heel and strutted away, leaving him to stew in his shattered delusions. The next phase hit hard and fast, a series of surgical strikes systematically sabotaging Ethan and Brielle's corporate dealings. One by one, their underhanded business negotiations unraveled in spectacular fashion. Within days, the Vineyard conglomerate abruptly pulled their buyout offer after our PR blitzkrieg portrayed us as a historic community anchor. the embodiment of Napa's proud heritage they'd never uproot without a customer backlash. All its posturing about market share and consolidation swiftly crumbled in the face of such toxic optics. Other potential investors fled like scattering roaches in the light, terrified of being labeled corporate pillagers. With their options dwindling, Ethan and Brielle found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn, each frantic move, born of arrogance and desperation, easily anticipated and deflected. Soon they'd have nowhere left to squirm except directly into the pit of consequences I'd meticulously excavated. I could already envision them dangling on the precipice, one fateful shove from total disgrace and ruin. With Ethan and Brielle's scheme to sell the winery lying in ruins, it was time to set the final stage for my grand defiance. I'd lured the snakes into a corner, now to spring the trap and crush them beneath my heel once and for all. The annual Winemakers Charity Gala presented the perfect opportunity. A high-profile event with investors, media, and industry bigwigs from across the valley in attendance. Precisely the backdrop I needed to thoroughly humiliate the treacherous fools threatening my legacy. "You wanted to speak with me?" Ethan sidled up beside me, his expression a pathetic mask of defeat and confusion. Behind him, Brielle hovered nearby, shoulders slumped in dejected resignation. I regarded them both with callous appraisal. "Yes, there's an important matter we need to discuss at the gala tonight. A major announcement regarding the winery's future." Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed my words. "You mean?" "Exactly." I allowed a calculated pause, lips curving into a razor-thin smile. "I think it's time I abdicated control and allowed the next generation to steer Connor Vineyards forward, with all our supporters present to bear witness." His features slackened in apparent relief, and I had to stifle a derisive snort. If only he knew the profound depths of his delusion. I don't know what to say," he stammered out. "Thank you for finally seeing reason, Avery. I promise Brielle and I will make you proud with the new direction." "Save your platitudes." I cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Just be prepared to embrace your role on the stage tonight. It'll be a performance neither of you will ever forget." As the gala commenced a few hours later, tension simmered just beneath the celebratory surface. Ethan and Brielle worked the crowds with artificial cheer, confidence buoyed by hubris and ignorance. They fully expected this evening to mark their ascension as winery overloads, a private victory party attended by the entire valley's elite. Little did the self-deluded fools realize the event heralded loss-doomed downfall, orchestrated by the very woman they sought to disenfranchise. Their humiliation would be gloriously public, a final legacy-staining trauma to complement the mountain of legal consequences still to come. Enjoying the evening? I sidled up to them with 2 fresh glasses of crisp Chardonnay, every inch the gracious hostess. Brielle accepted her drink, green eyes glinting with avarice. "It's just the start of many more to come under our management." "About that." I raised my glass in preparation for a toast. "I believe I promised a special announcement tonight?" Ethan's face broke into an eager grin, gobbling up the bait with reckless desperation. "You finally saw the light. We're ready to lead the winery into a new prosperous era." Seizing the moment, I strode up onto the stage and seized the microphone, my voice amplifying across the hushed ballroom with authority. "Esteemed guests, as many of you know, this gala celebrates not just the year's harvest, but the bonds of community, heritage, and family." I paused, letting the pregnant silence saturate the air like a heavy fog. "Therefore, it is with great dismay I must reveal there are snakes in our midst." Pitching my voice to drip with disdain, I turned a piercing glare upon Ethan and Brielle's ashen faces. Snake who've been siphoning profits into offshore accounts and orchestrating an illegal sale to corporate raiders, all in a selfish ploy to steal what isn't theirs. The room erupted in shocked gasps and furious murmurs. Ethan gaped at me in abject horror, his knees visibly trembling. Score 1 for catching the rats by surprise. "But take heart, my friends," I continued, allowing a vindicated smile. "For I've spent months unraveling this scheme and constructed a righteous counterattack to preserve the heart and soul of Connor Vineyards. And as we speak, law enforcement is en route to apprehend the conspirators and abate this betrayal once and for all." That caused another thunderous roar to swell, this one of cheers and applause from the assembled guests. Ethan and Brielle could only stand frozen, their traitorous aspirations rejected in the most grandiose, humiliating forum imaginable. This was more than just the death of their scheme, it was the public immolation of their dreams, their reputations irrevocably stained for all to witness. Smile widening to bask in their torment, I locked eyes with Ethan, allowing my voice to rise above the raucous din in one final damning declaration. And so ends the inglorious paths of those foolish enough to betray Connor family vineyards. The silence that followed my declaration was electric, charged with 1,000 unvoiced gasps and accusations. Every eye in the gala burned into Ethan and Brielle, the snakes exposed in their traitorous coils. Clutching the microphone, I drank in the moment, savoring their abject humiliation as event security closed in to apprehend them. There would be no escape, no last-minute reprieve to salvage their crumbling reputations. "You lying bitch!" Brielle exploded first, always the blazing tempest to Ethan's simmering tumult. Flecks of spittle flew from her snarling lips as she wheeled on me in impotent rage. "How dare you? After everything our family sacrificed to build this place up from nothing." A cruel laugh burst from my chest, mocking and utterly devoid of mercy. "Sacrificed?" I echoed back at her venomous glare. "By stealing and scheming behind my back to rob me of my rightful inheritance? If that's the extent of your sacrifices, then allow me to return the favor." Sweeping an arm out, I gestured to the assembled crowd staring in scandalized fascination. "Esteemed guests, I give you Brielle Evans and Ethan Baxter, a contemptible pair of vipers who not only embezzled funds and orchestrated an illegal sale, but deluded themselves into thinking I'd simply hand over my legacy to their greedy clutches once the money hit my accounts." A fresh torrent of gasps and whispers rippled through the room, judgment and damnation raining down on the exposed snakes. No corner of this prestigious venue would offer them refuge, only the unforgiving glare of a community outraged by their insidious betrayal. "Well, here's your wake-up call." I locked eyes with the fuming Brielle, jaw clenched to savor her swift descent into panicked realization. "The Connors don't fold to snakes or sell our souls so easily. We have a pride and resilience that parasites like you could never comprehend." Dismissing her with a contemptuous sneer, I turned my scathing address toward the squirming Ethan. "And you, my so-called husband-to-be orchestrating a con to strip me of everything I've sacrificed for. Tell me, were you even attempting to mask your disloyalty, or just stringing me along like a blissfully ignorant puppet?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but any protest withered on his ashen lips beneath my blistering glare. "Save your platitudes, we both know the truth. You saw an opportunity for an easy payday. Damn whoever's lives or legacies got chewed up along the way." My fingers stabbed with each enunciated syllable, driving the humiliation deeper. "Well, you miscalculated badly, Baxter, and now you'll reap the widespread ruination you've disgraced yourselves by earning." As if on cue, the ballroom doors flew open, revealing a grim-faced Marcia Blackwood flanked by county sheriff's deputies, the legal cavalry arriving to compound the conspirators' devastation. They swept forward as twin tidal waves of dread finally crested over Ethan and Brielle's masks of feigned innocence. Excuses and justifications died on their lips, choked off by the stark ramifications crashing down upon their elaborately orchestrated scheme. Ethan turned to me, momentarily unmasked in his desperation. "Avery, please." But I cut him off with a contemptuous slash of my hand. "I don't know who you are anymore, Ethan. Only that you're just another snake unworthy of my name or legacy." His shoulders slumped just before the deputies seized his arms, the dual blows of exposure and consequence robbing him of any final defiance. Fighting back a cruel smirk of satisfaction, I handed off the microphone to the approaching Marcia and stood tall, basking in the complete conquest over those who dared imperil everything I held sacred. The sight of Ethan and Brielle being led away in shackles amid a chorus of infuriated shouts branded itself into my memory like a searing brand. A watershed moment, their pathetic hopes and conniving snuffed out, the battlefield belonging solely to the righteous victor once more. In the days following the gala, a torrential downpour of consequences deluged Ethan and Brielle's shattered world. The dominoes I'd meticulously lined up for months toppled in devastating, unrelenting succession. First came the media crucifixion, a full-court blitz of skating exposés that left no damning stone unturned. Embezzlement figures, paper trails of illicit deals, and every unsavory allegation flooded the airwaves and newspapers. Then, the corporate clients and investors rapidly distanced themselves from the toxic fallout. Distributors and joint ventures severed ties as if the conniving snakes had developed a virulent, untreatable plague. Lucrative contracts evaporated overnight, closing off any potential lifelines or escape routes. Within a week, the once burgeoning empire Ethan and Brielle envisioned lay smoldering on the funeral pyre of their treacherous designs. Watching the dominoes spiral from my winery office's floor-to-ceiling windows, I sipped a crisp Chardonnay, smoky undertones from the Heritage Vineyards crop, complemented by the sweetness of hard-earned vindication. "It's all crumbling apart for them out there," Lucia murmured, mirroring my hawkish gaze. "Just like you said it would." "Of course." I swirled the glass, observing the pale liquid's lazy eddies. "Snakes like Ethan and Brielle slither on instinct and impulse. They can't help reverting to their vile natures. Snakes need to be defanged and rendered harmless before they can contaminate the surrounding environment." Lucia's brow furrowed as she processed my detached analysis. "And you're just okay with doing that to your own cousin? Your ex-fiancé?" A wintry smirk tugged at the corners of my lips. "I am the master of this vineyard, Lucia. Those sorts of personal entanglements and sentiments are luxuries I cannot afford to entertain, not when the stakes are so monumental." Shaking her head slowly, she shifted her gaze back outside. "I don't know how you have the stomach for it. All this, coldly dismantling their lives." "It's not about vengeance or settling scores," I replied evenly. This was always about upholding the values and legacy my father imparented upon these vines. Some degradation simply cannot be allowed to take root. A brief lull stretched between us as the enormity of the situation resonated. After a few thoughtful sips, I broke the silence. "We're in the final throes now. Ethan and Brielle's reputations are decimated beyond repair, their underhanded ambitions rendered stillborn." My finger traced the path of a large truck pulling away from a nearby warehouse, the last dribbles being siphoned off their illicit overseas accounts and asset seizures. Soon, their ill-gotten windfalls will be returned to their rightful place, and they'll be left as they began, common graspers stripped of all influence and credibility. A grim smile etched across my features as I envisioned them reaping the whirlwind of their own making. No prison could confine them as completely as the reputations and futures they'd willingly immolated on the altar of greed and treachery. Every eye would forever gaze upon them and see only the parasites who betrayed family and legacy for a quick payday, irredeemable snakes expelled from their padded Eden into the wilderness of permanent societal exile. A more comprehensive immolation than anything I could have orchestrated by sheer force of will. "It's the perfect karmic justice," I declared, clinking my glass against Lucia's in a muted toast. "They'll never hold power or influence in this valley or respected circles ever again." As the crystal chimed, my gaze drifted over the sprawling vineyards basking in the valley's reflected emerald glow. The spark of renewal and reinvigoration already gathered on the horizon, possibilities blossoming like a new bountiful harvest yet to be plucked. My family's righteous legacy endured, burnished anew while the snakes shriveled and expired, warnings to any who dared stake foolish claims against its roots. I would ensure the winery's spiritual heart stemmed strong and proud in the aftermath. This land and its fruits would continue upholding the honored Connor's name long after Ethan and Brielle faded from memory like the meaningless parasites they were. Order had been restored, karmic balance achieved with a ruthless, defensive precision. In the aftermath of Ethan and Brielle's disgrace, an unsettled quiet descended upon the vineyards, the calm before a new season of growth and rebirth took root. I stood alone amid the pruned vines, calloused fingers tracing the gnarled bark, as the first whispers of spring's rejuvenation danced on the crisp morning breeze. The heady, fertile scents served as a poignant reminder of the perpetual cycles governing our world. Decay always preceded new life flourishing from the fallow remnants. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply and permitted myself a faint, rueful smile. Ethan and Brielle were experiencing that harsh transition now, reaping the bitter harvest they'd sown through arrogance and betrayal. Once vitally connected to this sacred valley's lifeblood, they now found themselves permanently severed, withered husks left behind as the next evolution in Connor Vineyards progressed without them. You look entirely too philosophical for someone clutching pruning shears. Anthony's gruff voice shook me from my reverie. I cracked open one eye to find the cantankerous old vintner shuffling up beside me, shotgun slung over his shoulder in his usual curmudgeonly fashion. Just savoring the turning of seasons, I replied, nodding toward the replenished vines already studding with pale green buds, contemplating the cycles that govern all aspects of life. Anthony snorted, hawking a thick globule of phlegm into the pristine soil. If you're searching for some grand metaphor about your jackass ex-fiancé and money-grubbing cousin, you're barking up the wrong goddamn vineyard. I fought back a chuckle, recognizing Anthony's typical bluster. Not at all, I assured him, merely appreciating the moments of peace and clarity before we dive headlong into another demanding harvest. The brusque old man gave a grudging nod, squinting out over the sea of vibrant green shoots stretching toward the horizon. Well, at least you finally evicted those parasitic rats mucking about in the wine cellar, he growled. Spat enough dealing with aphids and mildew without vermin infestations threatening to strangle the whole operation. His crass wisdom struck an unexpected chord of sanguine appreciation within me. Somehow, Anthony's earthy pragmatism invoked the spirit of these lands more than any fragrant spring zephyr or poetic Renaissance musings could muster. Some legacies endured not through florid romanticisms, but by the hard-bitten determination to preserve their essence through every cycle of death and rebirth. Dad had that stubborn tenacity, and now, in the aftermath of my own battle to safeguard our proudest fruits, it seemed I had awoken to it as well. Nodding toward the distant winery complex peeking over the knolls, I voiced the conviction blossoming in my chest. I want to expand our attractions and hospitality ventures, I declared. Lavish new visitor experiences to take this place to even greater heights. Show the world we're not some quaint foothill boutique, but a leading cultural anchor as timeless as the grapes we cultivate. Anthony regarded me with one bushy-thing eyebrow arched. Mighty ambitious talk, Miss Connor. A cantankerous smirk tugged at the corner of his cracked lips. Hope you've got the grit to back it up once the snakes come slithering back. My fingers tightened around the pruning shear's worn wooden grip, drawing reassuring strength from its hewn permanence. I'm counting on it, I replied with a feral grin. The vines and soil have tasted treachery. They'll never allow anything besides the purest offerings to take nourishment again. Let the serpents bare their fangs, we'll simply lop off their skulls and continue flourishing as we were meant to. Anthony held my gaze for a long moment before unleashing a gravely chuckle that reverberated across the peaceful vineyard like a rollicking thunderclap. Well, I'll be damned, he sputtered between wheezing guffaws. You've finally grown a nice pair of auteur Italian grapes, haven't you, girl? My laughter joined his, the twin reverberations mingling and trilling through the awakening vines, harbingers of the revitalized spirit and enterprise taking root. As our mirth gradually subsided into a comfortable quiet, I gazed out over my family's verdant domain with a renewed sense of purpose igniting within. No longer would I merely aim to preserve these hallowed lands. That passive existence felt unbefittingly hollow in the wake of my trials. From the ashes of duplicity and desecration, a new, more ambitious path beckoned to be forged. One that would elevate Connor Vineyards to unprecedented glories and esteem its founder could scarcely have envisioned. But I sensed Dad's spirit smiling down upon the endeavor, regardless, for he would surely recognize the resilience and singular drive propelling his heir's ascent from turmoil to triumph. The snakes had been vanquished. Now it was time for the phoenix to stretch its wings and soar toward new promised harvests.
Hey, Kyle, I've sent the living expenses for this month. Please be careful with your spending, okay? At the end of every month, I called Kyle to confirm the transfer. I thought he might find frequent calls annoying, but I still wanted to hear his cheerful voice at least once a month. Thanks for the $15, Mom. I've been living on ramen noodles every day. Wait, what? I've been sending you $1,500 each month. What? We were both confused. According to my bank statement, I had indeed transferred $1,500 to Kyle's account. Why did he think it was only a fraction of that? $15 doesn't go far. But Kyle, isn't your company struggling right now? What are you talking about? My company is doing better than ever. I was even thinking about increasing your allowance. Kyle let out a surprised "Ha." Who told Kyle my company was in trouble? I pressed him for answers, feeling my temper rise. Kyle, I'll handle this. Don't worry. I hung up, determined to get to the bottom of this. I was going to Kyle's place and then we'd go to the police. I had a suspect in mind, and I wouldn't let him get away with it. I'm Monica, a 49-year-old single mother. I divorced my husband while pregnant and have raised Kyle on my own ever since. Thanks to our family business, I managed to work and study hard, ensuring a stable life for us. Kyle never suffered because he had just one parent. Kyle has always been serious, though a bit absent-minded. His grades were always top-notch. When my father fell ill during Kyle's elementary school years, it inspired him to become a doctor. He worked hard and got into a prestigious medical school at the top of his class. I planned to cover his university expenses, but Kyle earned a tuition waiver, which was a huge relief. I'm so proud of his hard work and achievements. The university was a 2-hour train ride from home, so I used the money saved from tuition for him to live near the university. We found a student dormitory where he could stay. It was a bit sad not being able to see his room due to the dorm's rules, but I understood it was part of his journey to independence. For the first few days, Kyle contacted me regularly. After a week, his messages became less frequent, and after a month, I hardly heard from him. I assumed he was busy adjusting to university life and didn't have much time to call. I decided to wait and see, believing no news is good news. A week before the summer break, Kyle finally called. He was excited about his classes, his part-time job, and mentioned he planned to come home for the holidays. Hearing his lively voice was a relief. Kyle asked if he could bring a friend from the dorm who had nowhere to go for the holidays. Considering Kyle's usual shyness, inviting a friend meant they had really hit it off. I agreed without hesitation. Hello. When I saw the friend Kyle brought home for the holiday, I was speechless. I had assumed he would look as reserved as Kyle. However, standing at the front door was a boy with blonde hair and several piercings in both ears. Welcome. Ah, are you Kyle's mom? You're so pretty you must be popular. Well, maybe. Ignoring my discomfort, the friend David made himself at home and sat down on the living room sofa. I wanted to say something about his presumptuous attitude, but I held back because he was a friend of Kyle's after all. During his 3-day stay, David was bossing Kyle around with this and that. It made me anxious, but Kyle didn't seem to mind too much. Hey, Kyle, let's hit up the arcade. There's no arcade around here. That's lame. If he was bored, he could just go home. Over these 3 days, I grew to dislike David quite a bit because he was always clinging to Kyle. I couldn't get any time with my son. He was disrupting our precious family time, and frankly, I wished he would just go home. In the end, David didn't just stay for 3 days. He stayed until Kyle left, and I didn't get any time with Kyle at all. After they returned to the dormitory, Kyle's calls became sporadic. Still, I received a thank you for the money and a brief update on his life once a month, so I believed he would be all right since he was almost an adult. But come fall, I got a call from Kyle mid-month, which was unusual. Sorry, I've been a bit busy and can't work my part-time job. I can't make rent. Could you send me some money? Is it because of exams? But I'm not thrilled about you overspending. I'll send it this time, but be careful from now on. When I said that, Kyle replied with a dispirited, I'm really sorry. It was unlike Kyle to run into money trouble, so I had a feeling David might be involved. Hey, is there something you're struggling with right now? I'm fine. Thanks for everything. Don't overdo it, all right. Got it. Kyle's lack of energy in his voice concerned me, but I thought he must be feeling down because it was the first time he had money problems. Then, at the end of the next month, I called Kyle. Hello, Kyle. I've put this month's living expenses into your account. Don't waste it, okay? I always called him at the end of the month to confirm the transfer. I figured calling a young man too often might be annoying, but I still wanted to hear his cheerful voice at least once a month. Thanks for the $15 each month. I'm eating ramen noodle every day. What? I've been transferring $1,500 every month. Huh. We both were puzzled by what the other had said. According to my bank book, I had been transferring the usual $1,500 into Kyle's account, so why did he think he was only receiving 1/10 of that? $15 isn't enough for anything. But, Mom, isn't your company having a tough time? What are you talking about? This year's been our best yet. I was actually thinking of increasing the amount I sent you. Kyle responded with a surprised, huh, to my words. Where on earth did you hear that my company was in trouble? I managed to find out who said it, and it made my blood boil. Kyle, I swear your mom is going to sort this out. I hung up the phone, intent on heading to Kyle's place. Once I pick Kyle up, I plan on going to the police station. The culprit is definitely that guy. I won't forgive him. I took a cab from the nearest station and stopped near the student dorms. Then I called Kyle and told him to sneak out. Make sure no one sees you, okay? Why? Just do it. Kyle seemed unconvinced, but he kept his promise and snuck out of the dorm. As he turned the corner and approached the car, I nearly screamed. Mom, it's been a while. Kyle, what happened to you? To your body? He was healthy when I saw him in the summer, but now in front of me was my son, looking nothing but skin and bones. What on earth had happened? I asked Kyle cautiously, Kyle, you've lost so much weight. What happened? At first, Kyle said it was nothing, but gradually he began to explain his current situation. Mom, after I returned from visiting home, you sent me a new bank book for a new account, remember? Since then, the allowance you've been sending has been cut to $15, right? I was really struggling, but I heard from David when I was home that you were talking about folding the company, so I thought life must be tough. I was stunned to hear this. I have no memory of discussing such things with Kyle while he was home. The company has been achieving its best performance this year. I have no intention of folding it. There was something else in Kyle's story that bothered me. Hey, what new account are you talking about? Huh. That's right. I've never created a new account since Kyle was born. Moreover, I've been depositing $1,500 into the same account every month. A horrible feeling came over me. Kyle, let's go to the police. The police? Why? Because someone might be stealing the money I've been sending to you. When I said this, Kyle's eyes widened in disbelief, but then as if he realized something, he began to think. Could it be? Kyle's suspicions were probably correct. Thinking of how Kyle has been hurt made my heart ache, but the person responsible for this needs to be held accountable. Driver, please take us to the nearest police station. Upon my request, the cab started moving. The taxi driver, having overheard our conversation, kindly took us to the biggest police station in town. When we arrived at the police station, I supported Kyle as we entered. Kyle used to be so conscientious about his diet and was in such good shape due to sports, but now he seems even lighter than me. As we walked, tears blurred my vision. The young man at the police station listened to both our stories and offered words of comfort. First, you've done well to endure through tough times, he said, and Kyle started crying as if a dam had burst. It turns out we've had similar complaints from this student dorm area lately. Really? According to the police officer, in the last month there have been about 3 families who have come with complaints similar to ours, and all of them unanimously pointed to a person named David as the culprit. Is the person you're talking about by any chance David? I asked, and the police officer sighed and nodded. Kyle was looking down beside me. He probably suspected it, but really hoped it wasn't true. I put my hand on Kyle's back and looked at the police officer. Is there an ongoing investigation? After a moment of thought, the police officer took Kyle and me to a separate room. He asked us to file a complaint. Of course, I agreed and immediately filled out the complaint form. After submitting it, an officer sat down with us and explained the current status of the investigation. David was like the contact person, getting close to the victims to obtain their account and PIN numbers to withdraw the funds, and it seems that they are currently investigating whether a certain man is the one receiving the stolen money. I stood up in shock when I saw the photo they presented. I know this man. Excuse me. Even the police seemed surprised, their eyes wide as they looked over at us. I took a deep breath to calm my pounding heart. Then I began to talk about the man in the picture. That's John Miller, right? He's my ex-husband and Kyle's father. Wait, my dad. Yes, the man in the photo was John, my former husband. The reason for our divorce was a mix of financial issues and affairs. After the divorce, I lost touch with him and never received child support. I thought it better that Kyle not meet him and be influenced negatively, so I never followed up on John's whereabouts, but I never imagined he'd be involved in a police matter. I felt a chill run through me. Basically, Kyle had been scammed by both an important friend and his biological father. Kyle was so shocked that he just stood there with his mouth open. Actually, we found out that John and David are father and son as well. What? David had told me before that he was the same age as Kyle. Kyle's dorm does thorough ID checks, so that was probably true. But if that's the case, it means that John had another woman pregnant at the same time as me. I no longer have any feelings for John, and though it's after the fact, it was still a shock. Are you saying David and I are brothers? Kyle seemed unable to comprehend this astonishing revelation. I was at a loss for words in the face of this unexpected fact. I'm sorry, but we need a bit of your cooperation. Of course, I won't hesitate to help catch those two. Kyle gave a small nod in agreement with my words. Following the police's instructions, we decided to take the necessary actions. I sneakily returned Kyle to the dorm, and I stayed at a nearby hotel. The next day, I waited for the right moment when David was around and called. Hey, is Kyle doing all right? Claiming that Kyle was busy washing dishes, I deliberately put the call on speakerphone. From this action, I gathered that David must be nearby. I've come into a bit of unexpected money, so I'll transfer it to your account. Make sure you use it wisely. Got it, thanks, Kyle said and hung up the phone. I stopped the voice recorder I had on hand, then I transferred $10,000 to an account under Kyle's name. The next morning, Kyle checked his online banking and sent the proof to the police. After stopping by a certain place, I went to the dorm with the police. I explained the situation to the dorm manager, who immediately took us to David's room. When I pressed the bell, annoying footsteps approached from inside. Who is it? Wait, what? David opened the door briskly and froze. He didn't understand why Kyle's mother and the police were standing together in a place where outsiders were not allowed. David seemed genuinely clueless. I put on a smile for the confused David. Long time no see, David. I'm Kyle's mom. What do you want with me, Kyle's mom? And you brought the cops. David looked at Kyle beside me and guessed what we were there for. We have a warrant and are going to conduct a search now. I'm really sorry, I have to go out. Can we do this another time? Without skipping a beat in response to the police officer's words, David tried to forcefully shut the door, but the police weren't about to let that happen. 2 men managed to open David's apartment door and started their search. Soon after the search began, there were calls from all around. "Found something." Hearing this, David seemed to slump his shoulders in resignation. Leaving David behind, Kyle and I entered the room. On the table, there were several passbooks and cards, all laid out. Each one was for an account under a different name. Looking at them, my head started to hurt. The cops, with practiced hands, sorted them by name and began snapping photos. "How did this get out? Kyle, did you rat me out? I thought you were my best friend. You must have been laughing at me on the inside while I was going through tough times." "It's not what it looks like. There's an explanation for all this." David tried to come up with all sorts of excuses to escape blame, but Kyle didn't react at all. Agitated by Kyle's attitude, David looked as if he was about to grab him at any moment. That's when I opened my mouth. "Swindling money from your own half-brother. That's just the lowest of the low." "Half-brother? Who's related to whom?" "You and Kyle are half-brothers," I said. Frozen by my words, David stood still. Given that he had limited his targets to students, it seemed certain that he had shared the preliminary investigation information with John. Because of my family's unique business, when John did some digging on Kyle, he would have quickly realized that he's my son. "No way." "It's true. John Miller is my ex-husband and Kyle's biological father. It seems he was having an affair at the same time, though, and that's when you were born." As I said this, David sat down in shock. From the police investigation, I knew that David had a sickly sister. After divorcing me, John immediately married his then-mistress. However, it seems the mistress did not want a boy, so David was neglected and raised haphazardly. As soon as the sister was born, John and the mistress divorced. The sister, being expensive to treat, was taken in by her maternal side, and it seemed David was taken in by John. They met his siblings from time to time, and during those meetings, David had been giving money to his mother for medical expenses. Learning this, I felt the significant presence that the concept of siblings held for David, and it seemed my hunch was correct. "I've been exploiting my own siblings." With those final words, David was taken away by the police. Kyle and I just went to the police station and were shown only the parts of the passbooks that concerned us. It turns out David had been getting people drunk or accompanying them shopping, and when stopping at the ATM, he would take note of the pins. Later, he would visit their rooms and take the passbooks, cards, and even IDs. The reason he had come back home with Kyle during the holiday was to check if my family was wealthy. He would then create new accounts, hand them over to the victims, and whenever money was deposited into their original accounts, he would withdraw everything only to deposit a little back into the new ones. No wonder I couldn't figure out what I had spent my money on when I updated my passbook. Now it all made sense, and I sighed. It didn't take long for David to name John as an accomplice, and by the next evening, John too had been apprehended. I went to the police and shared everything about John's background with them. A little while later, I went to visit John. Kyle wanted to come, but I asked to go alone this time and had let him wait outside. John, whom I hadn't seen in 20 years, had aged, but his attitude of looking down on others was still there. "Man, I've really done it this time. Got too carried away, I guess." Without a hint of remorse, that's what John said, and I couldn't hold back my anger. But yelling now would just wash away all the effort I've put in so far. I forced a smile. "Pathetic, aren't you? Lost it all on the horses, but hey, I'll just call my folks after ages and get out of here soon." John replied casually, as if making small talk. I slapped a piece of paper in front of him. His smug look changed instantly. "Hey, what the heck is this about?" "Oh, that. I told your parents everything about you." His parents, decent folks, kept in touch with me even after our divorce. They told me to bring this when I said I was going to see you today. "What are you talking about? This is a disownement letter." John lunged at me from behind the glass. I calmly replied, "You wouldn't understand their hardships, would you? They've been putting off seeing their own grandson, Kyle, because of your mess. You should have let me see him. Don't you dare say that after all you're running away." Raising my voice, a cop in the room told me to calm down. I took a deep breath to settle down. "Anyway, this means I can finally show your mother her grandson. Oh, and about David." "What about David? He's got nothing to do with you." "He doesn't want to see you ever again. Says he doesn't want anything to do with a father who'd exploit his own kids. Your mom said she'd take him in." "You're kidding. Without him, how am I supposed to live?" John sounded so pitiful that I just had to laugh. "Well, maybe you should start working and pay off your alimony." "Monica, come on. We go way back, right? Help me out." "How funny. Whatever we had ended 20 years ago." I answered with the biggest smile of the day, and John looked utterly hopeless. Feeling a wave of relief, I walked out of the visiting room without looking back. John's other crimes came to light, and he got a prison sentence. He won't be out for at least 5 years, giving us all some peace of mind. David, being a minor, ended up on probation. He's apparently being re-educated under the strict guidance of his foster parents now. Their home is even deeper in the boondocks than ours, with absolutely no form of entertainment, so it seems David's having a tough time. By the way, his sister is planning to undergo surgery abroad, and the money David was desperately gathering was for that purpose. However, it turned out that John had been embezzling those funds. David seems like he's still at an age where he wants to enjoy himself, but each time he gets a talking to from his foster parents. Kyle was initially confused, but he's buckled down and is studying hard to become a doctor, which was his original goal. He's been moving up in school and is about to face the national board exams soon. As for me, my company has grown even more, and I've been able to increase the financial support I give to Kyle. On top of that, someone who has been with the company through thick and thin and who Kyle has been fond of since he was a kid has unexpectedly proposed to me, and I'm currently holding off on my answer. It was Kyle who suggested that this person should propose, saying, "You might as well marry rather than just date." I was a bit impressed. He knows me so well. Nevertheless, with Kyle's clinical rotations and exams coming up next year, the expenses will surely increase. I'm thinking that I should first support Kyle in becoming a fine doctor before I start considering my own future.